The sky above the Dakota plains was not merely gray, it was the color of a 3-day-old bruise, a swollen expanse of violet and charcoal that promised violence. It stretched taut from the jagged eastern hills to the flat, endless western horizon, a canvas of impending doom. Below this malevolent ceiling, the land offered no softness. It was a sweep of brittle brown grass, stubborn sagebrush, and limestone rock that jutted from the earth like the bones of buried giants. This was Elara Vance's kingdom, a kingdom measured in rotting fence posts and the persistent grinding ache in her lower back. The wind here was not a breeze. It was a physical assault, a lonely, screaming companion that whipped strands of her wheat-colored hair across her eyes as she fought against the heavy iron gate of the north pasture. Her hands were a testament to the war she was losing. Once, they might have been soft, suitable for needlepoint or playing the piano, but those days were buried along with her husband. Now, her knuckles were white and swollen, her skin chapped into a roadmap of fissures that stung in the cold air. Her nails were broken, rimmed with the dark, fertile soil she refused to surrender. Silas Vance had been dead for 2 years. His body lay on the small rise behind the cabin, beneath a wooden cross that had grayed in the sun. But his presence was a ghost that refused to leave. It lingered in the scent of cured tobacco in the barn, in the specific way the porch swing groaned under the weight of the wind, and in the crushing silence that filled the cabin at dinner. The ranch, once Silas's gleaming dream of prosperity, had become Elara's purgatory. It was bleeding out, dying from 1,000 small cuts. The cattle were gaunt, their ribs showing like the staves of a barrel. The fences sagged like defeated soldiers, and the well groaned with the effort of coughing up mud. Yet, Elara held on. The townsfolk in Red Creek whispered that it was foolish pride. "Stubborn woman," they'd say over their warm ales. "She don't know when to quit." But it wasn't pride, it was survival. It was the terrifying knowledge that, if she let go, she would simply cease to exist. The air pressure dropped, heavy and thick, smelling of ozone and wet dust. The cattle sensed it first. Their lowing turned into a frantic, dissonant chorus as they milled near the skeletal branches of the lone cottonwood tree. Elara squinted at the horizon. The gray had deepened to a churning, living black. This wasn't a spring shower to bless the crops. This was a brawler, a tempest. "Get on, you stubborn beasts!" she screamed, her voice rasping from days of silence. She swung a length of frayed rope, slapping it against the flank of a lumbering steer. She had to get them into the corral near the barn, the only structure sturdy enough to withstand what was coming. The first drop of rain was fat and freezing, striking her cheek like a thrown pebble. Then another. Then the sky simply tore open. A solid curtain of water descended, instantly soaking her thin calico dress until it clung to her shivering frame like a second skin. The wind rose to a shriek, driving the rain sideways in blinding sheets. The world dissolved. The horizon vanished. There was only the gray maelstrom and the mud, the thick, greedy mud that grabbed her boots, trying to suck her down into the earth. Thunder cracked, a sound like a cannon firing inside a canyon, shaking the ground beneath her feet. The cattle panicked. Spooked by the lightning that forked like veins of fire across the sky, they scattered into the deluge. "No!" she cried, stumbling. "No, please!" But it was hopeless. She was losing them. Her livelihood, her future, her food. Running blindly into the storm. Defeated, gasping for air that was more water than oxygen, she turned back toward the fence line, intending to crawl to the barn. It was then, through the blur of rain, that she saw it. A dark anomaly slumped against the lowest strand of barbed wire, a heap of wet fabric that looked like a discarded sack of grain. Her first thought was dead calf, another loss to tally in the ledger of misery. But as she fought her way closer, fighting the wind that tried to push her back, the shape resolved. Shoulders, a head, a boot. It was a man. He was face down in the muck, one arm flung out as if reaching for a salvation that hadn't come. Fear, cold and sharp as a knife, pierced her exhaustion. A man out here? In this? No good could come of it. Her instinct, honed by 2 years of solitude and the predatory stares of men in town, screamed at her to run. "Bar the door! Load the shotgun! Hide!" She took a step back, but then she saw the stain, darker than the mud, spreading from his side, diluting into pink swirls in the rain. Blood. He was dying. Elara crept closer, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. With the toe of her boot, she nudged his shoulder. He groaned, a low, guttural sound of pure, unadulterated agony. Alive. That sound sealed her fate. Cursing herself, cursing the man, cursing God for sending this complication, she knelt in the mire. She grabbed the collar of his rough canvas duster and pulled. He was dead weight, dense muscle and bone. She grunted, her muscles screaming, dragging him inch by agonizing inch away from the wire. He was a stranger, a danger. But in that moment, he was a flickering candle in a hurricane, and she could not let him be extinguished. The journey to the barn was a special kind of hell. The mud fought her for every step. Twice she fell, tasting the grit of the earth. Twice she rose, sobbing with exertion, and pulled him onward. By the time she dragged him over the threshold of the barn, her strength was a hollowed-out shell. She collapsed beside him on the damp straw, her chest heaving, the world spinning in dark circles. For a long time, there was only the sound of the rain hammering the tin roof, a deafening, relentless drumming. Slowly, Elara pushed herself up. Her hands shook violently as she lit the kerosene lantern hanging from a beam. The flames sputtered, then caught, casting a warm, golden circle of light that pushed back the shadows. She turned the man over. He was young, younger than Silas had been. Perhaps 30. His face was angular, all sharp planes and hollows, covered in a week's growth of dark beard. His black hair was plastered to his forehead, but it was his eyes that stopped her breath when they fluttered open. They were a startling icy blue, the color of a frozen lake, and in them she saw the look of a cornered wolf. She found the wound, a ragged tear in his side, high on the ribs. The fabric of his shirt was fused to the skin with dried blood. A gunshot. Her stomach clenched. This was no traveler thrown from a horse. This was violence. Ignoring the tremor in her hands, she fetched a bucket of water and tore strips from an old grain sack. "Hold still," she commanded, her voice sounding foreign to her own ears. She cleaned the wound. He hissed through clenched teeth, his body arching off the straw, but he did not cry out. He watched her, his pale eyes tracking her every move with a mixture of suspicion and hazy confusion. When she finished binding him, she sat back on her heels. "You should have left me," he rasped. His voice was like grinding stones. Elara stood, wiping her bloody hands on her apron. "Maybe I should have," she said, her tone matching the coldness of the storm outside. "What is your name?" He hesitated, eyes narrowing. "Caleb." "Well, Caleb," she said, turning to hang the lantern higher, "it seems you've brought your trouble to my doorstep." "I'm telling you," he insisted, trying to rise and failing, collapsing back with a sharp intake of breath. "Let me die. There are men. They'll be looking." Elara looked down at him. In the flickering light, she didn't see a monster. She saw a broken thing, and the loneliness that had been her constant shadow softened the hard edges of her fear. "There's no one looking for anyone in this storm," she stated. "You stay tonight. Tomorrow you go." She left him in the dark, retreating to her cabin. But sleep did not come. She sat by the fire, a shotgun across her lap, listening to the thunder and the ghosts of her own life. Later that night, a scream tore through the noise of the wind. Elara ran back to the barn, weapon in hand. Caleb was thrashing in the straw, caught in a fever dream. "No, not the boy. Maddox, don't do it," he shouted, his voice thick with anguish. "Voss, leave them be." Elara froze. Maddox, Voss, names she knew, names the whole territory knew. The leaders of the Iron River Gang, ruthless killers who had terrorized the tri-state area for a year. They robbed banks, burned homesteads, and killed without mercy. The man in her barn wasn't just a victim. He was one of them, an outlaw. She backed away, horror, constricting her throat. She should drag him out, throw him to the elements. But then he quieted, his breathing ragged, and he looked so small, so haunted. She thought of Silas. She thought of the emptiness of her bed. She closed the barn door, shutting out the wind, but locking the danger inside with her. The storm raged for 3 days. The cabin became a cage. The forced proximity with Caleb was a simmering source of tension that made the air thick. He healed with the unnatural speed of a man used to hardship. By the second day, the fever broke. By the third, he was sitting up, his eyes clear and sharp. "I told you to leave me," he said, watching her stir a pot of meager stew over the hearth. "And I told you to shut up and eat," Elara shot back. "You know who I am," he said. It wasn't a question. "You heard me in my sleep." Elara stopped stirring. She turned to face him. "I heard names, Voss, Maddox." Caleb looked at the floorboards. The shame radiating off him was palpable. "I rode with them, yes." "You're a killer," she whispered. "I'm a thief," he corrected, looking up, his eyes blazing. "But I am not a child killer. That was the line." He took a shaky breath. "We hit a stagecoach near Willow Creek. There was a family. A boy. No older than 5. Voss wanted no witnesses. He told me to finish it." Elara's hand flew to her mouth. "I couldn't," Caleb said, his voice cracking. "I turned my gun on Voss. I told him no. Maddox shot me in the back. I managed to get to my horse and ride. I've been riding ever since." He looked at her, his soul stripped bare. "I have done terrible things, Elara, but I am not that." The confession hung in the air. Elara felt the wall around her heart develop a hairline fracture. He was a bad man, perhaps, but he was trying to be better. And in a world that had been nothing but cruel to her, that effort meant something. On the 4th day the sun broke through, but peace was short-lived. Elara was on the porch when she saw the dust cloud. A single rider. Her heart seized. It was Sheriff Alden. Alden was a tall, skeletal man with a drooping mustache and eyes that undressed you. He rode a pale mare and carried the law like a weapon to bludgeon the weak. He dismounted, his spurs jingling a solemn tune. "Afternoon, Widow Vance." "Sheriff," she said, blocking the doorway. Caleb was inside, cleaning his gun. "Heard you took a hit in the storm," Alden said, scanning the property. His eyes lingered on the repaired roof of the chicken coop, work Caleb had done in secret the night before. "Looks like you've had help?" "I do my own work," she lied, her voice steady. Alden stepped onto the porch. He smelled of stale tobacco and unwashed wool. He leaned in close, too close. "We're looking for a man, member of the Iron River filth, wounded, dangerous. If a lonely woman like yourself were to harbor him, she'd be in a lot of trouble. The rope doesn't care about gender, Elara. I am alone, Sheriff, as I have always been." Alden stared at her, a smirk playing on his lips. "You know, Elara, you don't have to be alone. I've told you before. A woman needs protection." He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Elara recoiled. "I am fine, Sheriff." He pulled his hand back, his eyes hardening. "If you see anything, you send word. I'll be watching." As he rode away, Elara leaned against the doorframe, her knees shaking. She had lied to the law. She had crossed the line. The attack came 2 days later. It wasn't the sheriff. It was worse. 3 riders appeared on the horizon, moving with the predatory slowness of wolves. Elara was in the garden. Caleb was in the barn loft. She ran to the barn. "They're here," she hissed. Caleb looked down, his face hardening into stone. 3? "Yes." "Hide," he ordered. "Get in the cellar. Do not come out." "No," she said, grabbing a pitchfork. "This is my home. Elara, please." But it was too late. The riders were in the yard. The leader, a brute of a man with a missing ear, Maddox, swung down from his horse. "Well, well," Maddox grinned, revealing rotting teeth. "Look at this little flower out here in the waste." "Get off my land," Elara said, raising the pitchfork. Maddox laughed. He stepped forward and backhanded her. The blow knocked her to the dirt, the metallic taste of blood filling her mouth. "Where is he, girl? Where's the traitor?" "I don't know who you mean," she spat. Maddox drew his pistol and cocked the hammer. "Then you're of no use." Crack! A rifle shot split the air. Maddox's head snapped back. A spray of red mist painted the air behind him. He crumpled to the dust, dead before he hit the ground. Caleb stood in the barn doorway, the smoking rifle in his hand. "Here I am, you sons of bitches!" The other 2 riders scrambled for their guns, but Caleb was faster. He worked the lever action of the Winchester with blinding speed. Crack, click, crack. 1 rider fell. The other, panicked, wheeled his horse and galloped away, screaming. Silence descended. heavy and ringing. Caleb lowered the rifle. He looked at Elara, then at the bodies. "He got away," Caleb said, his voice hollow. "He'll go back to Voss. They'll bring the whole army." He ran to her, helping her up. His hands were gentle, checking her bruised cheek. "Are you hurt?" "No," she whispered, trembling. "Caleb, you saved me." "I damned you," he said bitterly. "They will burn this place. We have to go." "No," she said, "we fight." But that night, the Iron River Gang didn't wait for a fight. They sent a message. Elara woke to the smell of smoke. The fields, her winter wheat, her livelihood, were ablaze. An orange wall of fire roared against the night sky, consuming everything Silas had worked for. They stood on the porch, watching the destruction. The heat was intense, drying the tears on Elara's face. "They didn't attack the house," Caleb said quietly. "They want to starve you out. They want to hurt you to get to me." He turned to her. The firelight danced in his eyes, making them look like molten gold. "I have to leave, Elara. If I stay, you die." "If you leave, I have nothing," she cried, grabbing his shirt. "Don't you understand? The land is dead. You are the only thing that is alive in my world." The barrier broke. Caleb pulled her to him, his mouth crashing onto hers. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a collision of desperation and grief. It was a kiss that tasted of smoke and blood. For the first time in years, Elara felt, truly felt. She wrapped her arms around his neck, anchoring herself to him as the world burned around them. "I love you," he whispered into her hair, "and that is why I have to go to them. I have to finish this." Before dawn, he was gone. Chapter 5. The noose tightens. The weeks that followed were a gray blur. Elara lived like a ghost in the blackened ruins of her ranch. But she listened. She went to town for supplies, enduring the whispers, keeping her head down. And then she heard it. "Captured him near Snake Gorge. Sheriff Alden brought him in this morning. Hanging is set for Friday." Elara dropped her bag of flour. The bag burst, a white puff of cloud on the dirty floor. She didn't go home. She went to the livery stable. She traded her mother's silver locket, her last possession of value, for a fast horse and a heavy, darker revolver. Friday morning dawned with rain. It was fitting. The town square of Red Creek was a sea of black umbrellas and muddy boots. The gallows stood in the center, a stark wooden skeleton against the weeping sky. Elara stood at the back of the crowd, a shawl covering her head, her hand gripping the cold steel of the gun in her pocket. They brought Caleb out. He looked terrible, bruised, limping, thin, but his head was high. He scanned the crowd, and when his eyes found hers, he paused. He shook his head slightly. "Don't," his eyes pleaded. "Live." Sheriff Alden stood on the platform, preening. "Citizens, today we see justice. This man is a killer, a scourge." He placed the black hood over Caleb's head. He adjusted the coarse hemp rope around his neck. "Any last words?" Alden sneered. Caleb's voice was muffled but strong. "She taught me to live clean. I'd die for her." Alden laughed. He reached for the lever. Bang! The shot didn't come from Elara. It came from the tree line. Sheriff Alden's hat flew off. Confusion erupted. "Now!" Elara screamed, though she didn't know who had fired. She drew her weapon and fired into the air. "Move! Get out of the way!" The crowd scattered like ants. In the chaos, Elara charged the platform. She didn't climb the stairs. She scrambled up the side. She pulled a knife from her boot and slashed the rope around Caleb's neck. "Run!" she screamed, grabbing his arm. "Elara, what are you—" "Move!" They jumped from the platform, landing in the mud. Bullets whizzed past them, thumping into the wood of the gallows. They scrambled onto the horse she had prepared. "Hold on!" she yelled. The horse reared and bolted, charging through the panicked mob, heading straight for the open plains. They rode until the horse blew foam, until the town was just a bad memory behind them. But the posse was coming. Elara could see the torches in the distance, a winding snake of fire pursuing them. "The river," Caleb gasped, clutching his side where the old wound had torn open. "We have to cross the river. It's the only way to lose the scent." The river was swollen with the rains, a churning brown monster tearing at its banks. "It's suicide!" Elara shouted over the roar of the water. Stay here, Caleb said, sliding off the horse. Take the horse. Go south. I'll draw them off. No! Elara jumped down. She grabbed his face in her hands. We are together, in life or death, together. Caleb looked at her, tears mixing with the rain on his face. Together. They slapped the horse's flank, sending it galloping away to create a false trail. Then, hand in hand, they stepped into the freezing water. The current hit them like a hammer. It swept them off their feet instantly. They were tumbled, tossed, smashed against rocks. The water filled Elara's nose and mouth, dark and suffocating. She felt Caleb's hand rip away from hers. "Caleb!" she screamed, choking. She was slammed against a submerged log. She clawed at it, gasping for air. She looked downstream. She saw a dark shape caught in the eddies near the far bank. Summoning the last reserves of her strength, she pushed off, swimming with desperate strokes across the current. She dragged herself onto the mud of the far bank, coughing up water. He was there, lying in the reeds, still. She crawled to him. "Caleb, Caleb, please." She pressed her ear to his chest. Thump, thump. Faint. But there. Morning broke with a brilliance that hurt the eyes. The storm had scrubbed the world clean. The sky was a polished turquoise. On a small hill overlooking the river, shrouded in morning mist, stood the ruins of an old Spanish mission. The roof was gone, and moss grew on the stone walls, but it was shelter. Inside, beneath the shadow of a crumbling archway, Elara sat with Caleb's head in her lap. He was awake, weak but smiling. "We made it," he whispered. "We did," she said, stroking his damp hair. "Where do we go now?" he asked. "We have no horses, no money, no home." Elara looked out through the empty window frame. She saw the vast open plains stretching out before them. It was wild. It was dangerous. It was empty. But for the first time in her life, the emptiness didn't look like loneliness. It looked like freedom. "We go. Forward," she said, bending down to kiss him. "We walk." The Iron River Gang would hunt them. Sheriff Alden would hunt them. The winter would be cold, and the nights would be hard. But as the sun rose higher, warming the ancient stones of the church, Elara Vance knew one thing with absolute certainty. She was no longer just surviving. She was living. And they would face whatever came next, the storms, the fires, the law, together.